everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on rashpixel.fm. I'm Pete Wright, and I am here with Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, Pete.
Hi, Nikki.
Hello, everyone.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Are you feeling good?
Yes, it's going to be a good show.
I hope that you're feeling good, because it's a legendary day.
Yes, it is. Taking control history.
We are making taking control. I can't believe you just said taking without tripping.
Oh my gosh, I totally did.
You did. There was not even like you're a pro. As you may recall, we have been talking about self-care and ADHD over the last few weeks. Last week, we focused on the role of exercise in your overall well-being. Today, we are digging into the sometimes thorny question of medication, and we have a fantastic guest to help us do just that. But before we get started, head over to TakeControlADHD.com. You can get to know this show a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there on the website or subscribe to our mailing list, and then connect with us on Twitter or Facebook at TakeControlADHD. And of course, you can call us, leave us a voicemail at 503-664-4ADD, and get your voice, thoughts, and questions on this show. We would certainly love to hear from you. In fact, many of the questions that we are talking about in our conversation this very day came from you. So thank you all for participating before the show. Our guest today is Laurie Dupar. She is a senior certified ADHD coach and a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and she is here to lend her expertise to help us unpack this topic of medication and the ADHD brain. Laurie, welcome to the ADHD podcast.
Thank you, Pete. I'm excited to be here. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, Laurie. Thank you so much for being here. Well, as Pete said, we are doing this series right now around self-care and ADHD. And you were actually one of the very first people I thought of asking to join us when we were doing the self-care series, because I followed your work for a long time, because you've been doing this for a while. I've heard you talk about medication in the past, and I thought you're going to be the perfect guest for our listeners. And I'm thrilled that you're here to share your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, to get started, I kind of want to go from the perspective of somebody who is just newly diagnosed, somebody that maybe just got the diagnosis and they're not really sure what to do with it. What would you tell somebody, or how would you prepare for them for that first doctor's appointment or that follow-up doctor's appointment after getting the diagnosis, and they start to talk about medication?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first, Nikki, actually, it's sort of amazing for a lot of people to realize sometimes the diagnosis is made and the medication is prescribed in a very short amount of time. So we're really talking about a lot of information that people are trying to absorb. And also, that says that they're trying to figure out how this changes them, or does it change them, or what does this mean, what doesn't this mean, really in a short amount of time. So I want to just say, I think sometimes if we are aware that is common for it to happen, for that overwhelm to be there, to know that it may feel a little bit like we're sort of being pushed through a mill. And I say that because that's the experience that a lot of my clients tell me, sort of pushed through a mill and out the door with a prescription. We're not really sure what to do with it. And really the last thing that usually the doctors will say is, okay, make sure you're sleeping well and that you're eating. And that's kind of the directions. And there may be a follow-up appointment scheduled in a month, or oftentimes clients are not even, are still even a little bit confused about, okay, what's the follow-up with this? So I think one of the first things I would say to people who are newly diagnosed and perhaps taking that step to try medication as a management strategy for themselves is to really just know that it's a process to do this. Whether it's right or it's wrong or not, a lot of times people find out that they end up needing to be the advocate for themselves. That even though they may be working with a psychiatrist who's trained to work with mental health disorders and prescribe medication for that oftentimes the people who are prescribing the medication may even be asking the client, so what do you want to take? Which is a little disconcerting to a lot of people. They're wondering,
yes.
Shouldn't you know what to prescribe? So just know that might happen. Knowing that that's a very common scenario with a lot of clients, it really does fall on us to familiarize ourselves as much as possible with what the choices are that we have to make. And it really does come down to a choice. So if you've just been diagnosed and the doctor's saying, do you want to take medication, or sort of getting out the prescription pad, I would even say if you're not comfortable with that, just stop and say, I want to have a discussion about my choices. right? Especially if you're an adult being diagnosed, a young adult maybe in college, or, a young adult anywhere between 20 and 60, because I'm in my 50s now, so I could still consider myself a young adult.
That's right. Of
right?
course.
Know that you can stop the process at that moment. Taking medication at this is a choice that you can make. And I think we're much more likely to follow up with it, to engage in the process if we have the answers that we need. And if you don't feel like the answers are coming from the person who prescribes it to you, because unfortunately I hear from a lot of people, sometimes the doctors will say, well, you don't really need to know that information. Absolutely, you need to know that information. This is a choice you're making for yourself. And you want to ask them, how does it work? How do I know what are the choices? What are that I have about medication? How do they work differently so that I know which one I want to try or which formulation that might be most useful for me? If you don't feel like you're getting the answers, I know this may sound sort of harsh, but find someone that is going to answer the questions for you. This is one of those situations where you want to be working with someone who is especially patient with the process and really understands that this is a process of you and them working together to find the right medication that works for you, that provides the most benefit for you, and hopefully not a lot of side effects.
I love how you say it's a choice, because I think that sometimes clients will go into the doctor's appointment feeling like they just have to take whatever the doctor tells them. You know what I mean? Because it's like they're kind of this authority figure. You have to trust them. And I'm really glad you kind of bring that back to, well, wait. If you have some hesitation, get your information, get the facts, and then you can come back and make a decision. That's really great.
Yeah, it really is. And I a lot of what I do, I have classes on ADHD medications, and the reason is because I realized that this was happening for most people. When I hear that a patient or a client is very satisfied with their prescriber, their medication's working for them, it's really sort of more of a rare case than not.
That is so sad.
It is very sad.
Oh, my goodness.
And these are individuals that are the ones that we expect to have the expertise. And so when someone's trying to make a big decision about themselves, when they're trying to take in new information about their health status or their mental health status, you really need somebody that is able to work with them and understands, because there's a lot of misinformation out there on ADHD medications, and a lot of it can be very scary and misleading.
Well, Laurie, I have a question about that, actually. And this is a specific question that came from a client. She's asking, I once heard an ADHD expert say that people on stimulant medications should give up coffee, that the medication would somehow not work as well if you were caffeine dependent. Is there any truth to this?
Sort of an interesting question. There is definitely a relationship with caffeine when you're drinking caffeine and you're taking stimulant medication specifically. And I say a relationship because they do tend to affect one another, and the reason is because caffeine also stimulates our dopamine in our brain. So what typically happens, especially when you're a young adult or a young adult being diagnosed, is, remember, you've always had ADHD. What's happened is that you've been compensating for it, and then at some point, what you were doing to compensate wasn't working, whether that's because there was a change in your environment, change in what was expected of you, whatever. But during that time, most people may not even realize that what they were doing was trying to compensate for that decreased amount of dopamine available in their brain. And one of the things that is highly available to us is caffeine. In the coffee form, it might be in tea. Green tea is very popular, and all of our energy drinks that everybody's drinking, right? So what happens is, because the dopamine increase that happens when you drink coffee is not equivalent to the amount that you would get specifically and particularly in the medication format. People might have been drinking quite a bit of coffee prior to being diagnosed and also being put on prescription medications. At that point, what happens is that they oftentimes sort of potentiate each other. What I mean by that is that if people are drinking caffeine, and usually it's more than, some people are really sensitive, it could be even just 1 cup, in addition to their medication, sometimes it makes them feel more activated, more not activated in a way that makes them feel agitated, right?
Yeah, frenetic, uncomfortable.
Yes, it's
feeling,
uncomfortable. Yeah. And what I love about this question, so it could be 1 cup for somebody, it could be 4 cups for somebody else. Typically, when the person is on the right dose of the right dose of medication, the right type of medication, is they just don't feel a need to drink coffee or caffeinated coffee. They just sort of, it just really sort of sloughs away. They may have 1 cup because they just like the taste in the morning. But the challenge, what oftentimes is happening is that the prescriber isn't asking them, how much caffeine are you drinking?
Right.
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah,
no.
That's not a common question,
No,
I'm sure.
they don't. I ask it because it tells me a couple things. If someone is on medication and drinking a lot of caffeine, it's telling me they're not getting what they need out of their medication because they're still trying to supplement. And in fact, I'll tell you a story about a gentleman. I was doing a talk at one of the conferences, and he was a gentleman around maybe 50s, late 50s, and he came up to me and had been listening to my talk, and he told me the medication he was on, and I think he was on Adderall, which is a common medication for ADHD. And he said, but I'm also doing 8 shots of espresso a day. And I was just, I just stood back and, right, I'm up here in Seattle, so I'm in sort of the land of the coffee, right? And I also am a nurse practitioner, so I was thinking, my first thought was, how do you afford it? Second was like, how does your stomach stand it? Because that's like gut rock, right? In your stomach. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at him like, are you not just like jumping out of your skin? But I calmly said to him, you may want to look at your dose of medication because it seems like you're trying to increase that dopamine with the espresso shots. And you may want to take that back to your doctor and just go try and increase that. Just check that one. Yeah. So I did hear, again, my head was spinning. And how do you drink 8 shots of espresso a day? But I was in contact with him again, and it was actually the difference that it made for him. He was down maybe to 1 shot of espresso a day that he enjoyed because it was part of his social networking, and medication had been increased to what he was trying to get the caffeine to do. So that's typically what the conflict is that when you combine especially the methamphetamines or amphetamine type of medication with coffee, it tends to make people agitated. So they think this is the wrong medication for me, when in fact what has been happening is that they started the medication when they're also still at that same level of caffeine intake.
It just seems like a key learning from that one is, from this perspective of advocacy is, oh my goodness, you have to take ownership of telling the provider what you are doing, in your with your caffeine intake.
Yeah. And the thing is that people don't know that. And it seems sort of a silly point that we would have to go in and say, oh, and by the way, just in case, because I know it's important, this is what my caffeine intake is. Oftentimes they're not asking, how are you sleeping? They're just telling you, make sure you're sleeping, right? Yeah. And most people don't sleep, medication or no medication.
I was just going to say that when you said that, I was thinking to myself, how many clients I have that have sleeping problems. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say.
Yeah, no, it's the truth. And the fact is that next to medications, this has been my experience, medications can be highly effective. Again, it has to be finely tuned to you. It takes working with a prescriber that understands that it's a process to find that, meaning you might have to adjust dosages or different kinds of medication. But the second biggest lifestyle, taking care of yourself piece, is actually getting consistent sleep. Sleep. And that's surprising to people. Most prescribers are not asking about that when they're prescribing the medications.
I want to ask you, because I had a client recently who has been diagnosed for a while, but she decided to try medication for the first time because she had not been on it up until this point. And I was working with her and I asked her to kind of follow up. So how do you feel it's working? Is it working for you? And she was just, I don't know, Nikki. I have no idea if this is working for me or not. Is that a pretty common response?
Well, it's a common response because it's a common question. So how's it going? How's it working for you? And that's the question that professionals are asking. And it is a big conundrum, just like your friend said, I don't know. What am I supposed to know? I don't know. Is it working or is it not working? People tend to be on the lookout, almost hypervigilant, for if it's not working. If their body is just, and their brain is simply adjusting to it, if I have a headache, am I sleeping, am I eating right? Those things that we're sort of warned about as we walk out the door. But what happens is most people don't know, how do I know if it's working? And providers or prescribers, I should say, are not necessarily asking it. So some of the things that might be surprising, how you know the medication is working, sometimes it's just asking the questions like, I don't really know. Because if you're not getting negative side effects from the medication, you might be at least sort of in the right ballpark with the right medication and the right dose for you, because you're not getting the negative side effects. So not knowing if you're experiencing something doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong medication for you, right? The next is that most people find, and I hear this with adults, they feel a sense, they're not really sure what's different, but there's a sense of increased productivity. And what I mean by that is it might be that, for instance, college students may just notice that they're actually able to stay longer at studying, or they're able to sit longer when they're trying to write a paper or something like that. Or some adults might notice that, wow, I'm not getting up and down as much from my desk or that I used to be. So there's an increased sense of productivity, whatever that means for each person. The other thing is that people almost expect that they're going to experience an increase in energy, because we have this sort of odd notion that when we're talking stimulant medications, that it's stimulating our body, which is not true. It's stimulating the dopamine in our brain. I actually like to call them dopamine boosters rather than stimulant medications. So people just start to feel a sense, they feel more energetic, their mood might even lift, their anxiety goes down, which again is sort of counterintuitive if we sort of think about sort of the old-fashioned way of understanding what these medications do. But because people are now able to focus more on the things that they want to, that may or may not have been as interesting, which is why we get distracted, now they're getting things done. So they feel better about it. They are actually sleeping better. And whether that's because, and again, it's got to be the right dose at the right timing, but they're sleeping better. And I just honestly think it's because they're feeling like they're doing stuff during the day. I'm getting it done.
Yeah,
I'm living my life.
In control.
It's exactly right. Yep. Yeah.
You know, I had a college student once that when you were talking about that, it reminded me of a story that he told me, is when he first started taking his medication. And of course, I'm asking as a professional, how's it going? How's it working for you? And one of the things he said to me was, I couldn't believe it. On Saturday, I got all these errands done, and I actually went to the store and bought batteries.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
You know,
yes.
He had been procrastinating on this for so long, and he finally did it. And that was like his biggest win, you know?
Yeah. And it's like that. And I'm so glad you gave me the opportunity to say, this is what you notice if you're on the right medication and the right dosing. You will notice this increased sense of productivity. The other, and I think there's somehow this myth that it's, you know, when you're on the right medication, when you start ADHD medication, it's a little bit like the parting of the Red Seas, right? Like, or the lights just go on. For some people, it is like that. It's like a fog lifts for them, like a veil is totally pulled off. You know, like there's this clarity that they haven't had before. But for a lot of people, it's much more gradual than that. So I actually have a tool, and I'm happy to share it with your listeners, that helps people track their medication, that helps them track what dose they're on, what amount they're what medication they're on, what dose they're on, when they're taking it, and then actually sort of rate, okay, how would I rate my ability to concentrate, my distractibility, my ability to stay on task? I even have blank areas there. So people, because usually people are trying to, there's a couple of areas that they're wanting to address. Sometimes, I remember one client I was working with, she was wanting to write a book, and it was very important to her to do this. But her frustration was that because of her ADHD, she would work on it one day and then she would go back the next day and she couldn't remember what she wrote. So she felt like she was wasting all this time having to go back and reread these chapters to catch her up to date so she could write the next one. So she was highly motivated to, if medication could help her remember, that would be worthwhile for her. And I remember I worked very closely with her psychiatrist. She lived in another area than I did. And I remember the day she came back and she said, oh my goodness, I rememred what I wrote. And it was like a miracle for her, right?
That's so great. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's what you want to see. Yeah.
Yeah. So that again would not be anywhere in a book, but meaning that's a checklist like you might get in a magazine or something. But I want people, I ask people, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What is it that you want to get done that's not getting done? And to help them keep track of that as one of the indicators of how well the medication is or isn't working.
Well, I have a very specific question for you that came from Facebook in regards to this, and I'll just read it to you. And I apologize if I'm messing the pronunciation of the medicine wrong. You can correct me. My son is on Metadate. Is that correct? Metadate, 50 milligrams for the morning and 10 milligrams is needed. He says it doesn't do anything for him, but he's also 15. I'm on Adderall, 20 milligrams, and have found it to be very beneficial. Would he benefit from changing? My doctor says they all pretty much do the same thing. I haven't talked to my son's pediatrician yet.
Well, we've got a couple things here, right? We have a 15-year-old. I adore working with adolescents. I have 4 kids, all grown, and I just figured I was born to work with adolescents, right? They are
That's good to know. I will pass some people on to you.
Completely wonderful and a challenge and amazing. What's happening at 15, right, is that we're pulling away from our parents. That's what we're supposed to do. That's our job at 15, is to bond with our peers. What I find, and there's really specific ADHD challenges or ADHD specific things that are happening when you're in this time period and you have ADHD. For kids that have been diagnosed earlier on, they typically hit this age, and it's very common for them to say, they're trying to figure out who they are. So because there's sort of this, there's this myth out there that it changes their personality, they're wondering, what am I like without the medication? So it's very common that students in this age group are wanting to try it without the medications just to see what it's going to be like. Because they're curious about it. It's a natural curiosity. That's what they're trying to do, figure themselves out at that age. The other thing that I know is if someone at 15 doesn't want to take the medication, they're not taking it. I had a little 10-year-old that was what we call cheekiness medication. So even at that age, right, he might have been in 5th or 6th grade or something, he was getting some pressure from friends that, you can't take, that's bad stuff for you, or that's, poison or addicting or something. And 15-year-olds, I guarantee you, are all have that and more that's coming at them. That people want to buy their medication, they want to abuse it. So there's a lot of pressure on these kids. What I typically do at this, so anyway, and should he be on his mom's medication? What I would first want to know, what are we looking at here with regards to sort of the comment of it's working or it's not working? And I would actually spend time with the student themselves. How does he know? What is he noticing? What are his goals? What does he want to be different? Mom may or not be getting the whole complete story, not because she's an awful mother, but because she's the parent, right? Because that's their job, to pull away from us a little bit. So it could be an adjustment in medication, but the fact is, if he doesn't want to take it, he's not going to. So it doesn't matter what you change it to. If he really wants it to work and he's perhaps not doing as well as academically as he wants, or there's something like that, then it's about engaging him in the process. It's about engaging him and talking to him. What does he notice when he's on the medication? What does he notice when he's off it? What is it that he would like to be different? Would he like to try a different medication to see if it helps him to reach some of the goals he has? Would he like to go off medication? And when I say going off medication, and I do this with clients who want to, and of course their parents are aware of it at this point, is we sort of do it as a science experiment. I will ask them, how will you know if this is working or not for you, right? How will you know if you want to go back on the medication? How will you know if you want to stay off the medication? What are sort of the non-negotiables here with regards to maybe what's happening in the family, those sorts of things. So whether or not medications do not work the same for everyone. Genetically, it's more likely that the medication that works for biological relatives it's going to be similar, that it's going to work similarly for them. However, that's not always true. So in this particular case, medications do not work the same for each person, and 20 milligrams of Adderall is different than 50 milligrams of Metadate, and an extra 10 if he wants it. It's a little bit like apples and oranges, but some people are allergic to oranges, and some people like apples better.
So what I'm hearing from you is she needs to maybe just get a little bit more curious and ask some more questions to her son, and really probably talk to the pediatrician as well too, and dig in a little deeper of where he's coming from.
And these two medications are very different. They're actually on two different classifications of stimulant medications.
Okay.
But the first thing I would say, and recognizing that, right, if the Adderall works for her, it could very well be that particular kind of formulation would also work for her son. However, what I know about 15-year-olds is I would want to first make sure he's on board with this.
Right. Yes. Well, I have a 13-year-old. I understand that.
Okay.
And pretty much anything I ask is a no. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
if I want it, well, then I don't want it, Mom.
Right. Oh, yeah, exactly. So this is, these are the whole fun things that, life throws at us. And he's 15. So
I have another question about the effectiveness long term. I had a client ask me, he was told by his doctor, pretty much take the medication during the week, but if you don't have to take it on the weekend, don't. And he was a little baffled by that because he's like, what do you mean? When would I never not need this? And it brought up some anxiety for him and he wasn't really sure what to do with that. And so when he found out you were going to be a guest on the show, that was his question is, does it really lose effectiveness over time if you take it long term?
So one of my first questions, is this a college student?
No, this is a professional. He's probably in his late 30s.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Some people, this is the other sort of, these are other factors of how much ADHD medications are individualized to the person. There used to be sort of the old school was that you only take it during, when you need it, like academically. And so you would vacate your medication holidays, don't take it on the weekend, don't take it during summer breaks, things like that. What we're now discovering is that medications work best when they're taken consistently. And it's sort of not like the medications work. Actually, what happens is the individual experiences more success, more consistency in success when it's taken consistently, meaning every day, right? It just makes sense. Having said that, I do have some adults who will take the medication only on the weekends because their problem is not the job that they're doing. They love their job. They're activated by their job. They're enthusiastic about it, but they're just having a heck of a time getting that honey-do list done, right? So that's what they might have been coming to see me because their goal was to get that honey-do list done for the relationship. Does it affect long-term? There's also a sense that if you need to take medications for a long time, that your body develops sort of a tolerance to it, or it's not going to be effective. I don't think that happens as commonly as we perceive that that's supposed to happen. A lot of people have been the same medication for years and years, and and without having to change the dose, and the medication has worked fine for them. What happens is that at certain phases in our life, one of them being when we're in adolescence, another seems to happen in our 20s, our mid-20s. And because we just don't understand that much about the aging brain, probably our brain is also going through different changes at different phases throughout our life. So the effectiveness of the medication, how it's working for individuals may change based on what is really sort of a physical change that happens to everyone in their brain. The brain goes through sort of what we call a repruning process. So they may notice a change in their medications and nothing else might have changed in their lives, but it's just part of their natural body maturation that's happening.
It's an interesting thing, though, too, because doesn't working with another psychotherapist whose comment on that was, we also have to take into consideration that the drugs themselves have actually gotten smarter, and that their effect can be, certain drugs, their effect can be even more just sort of localized and isolated, and have the impact on, and then when it is out of your system, it's off. And so you really can use it like a light switch. I mean, have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, actually, more adults than students. Actually, there's sort of a few classifications of people that are really appreciating the fact that we now have long-acting medications, that they don't just work 2 to 4 hours or that they work long-term. Those tend to be moms, teachers, and students, college students, honestly, because the tasks that are required of us during that amount of time oftentimes is not just limited to a certain 8 hours span or 2 hour span. Having said that, I have many professionals that I work with that they recognize that there's certain parts of their job that are most difficult. I'm thinking about a a professor psychology that I worked with for a while. She had loved getting up and talking with her students. It was the planning, what she was going to say, or making her class plan, right? That she just could never get done. So for her, when she was sitting down to do that particular task of her job, she would use her medication to help her focus, to help decrease the distractibility so she could get that done. And she really didn't take her medication any other time. So I think that's an example of that. I had another gentleman who a lot of his job was outside. He did it was like a geological job of some sort. But when he had to do paperwork, which was essential to his job, reporting what he discovered, reporting what they did during those days out in the field, he was really, really struggling. In fact, a lot of times these types of struggles are ones where people are in danger of losing their job despite how well they do in other areas. So he, again, was someone that may not have realized how much you can personalize how you take the medications. And he just knew on that particular day when he needed to do that paperwork, that's when he took his medications. The problem is when we're talking perhaps about, I'm thinking about, and I know that a little bit related to students, but it could be related to adults as well, is that if what we're trying to accomplish on the weekend, for instance, that if it is requiring anything to do with our executive function, we will benefit from having the medication. A lot of students also, I found, like with college students, for some reason they've gotten the message that they just need to take the medication when they're studying or in class, sort of whatever the identified main challenges that they've discovered with their prescriber. But the challenge with that is that these students are studying at 10 o'clock at night, right? They need to engage that part of their brain of remembering, of learning, of holding their attention on something for long periods of time. So it's not uncommon when I'm working with someone that I'll realize that they somehow gotten the message that they didn't need to take the medication on the weekend because they weren't in class, quotes unquote. But the fact is they're still going through the process of studying and learning and remembering and trying to stay focused. And they were trying to do that without the benefit of their medication.
What about, are the medications addictive? I had a particular client who really feared taking them because he actually had in his family addictive tendencies. So I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on them being addictive.
Well, this is how I answer that question. And I also, there's a couple things I want to say. That a lot of what we're seeing in addiction, it's very common if someone's been diagnosed with ADHD, prior generations have some history of addiction. And the reason is because years ago, or the past generations, we didn't really know what was going on. So a lot of people self-medicated.
That's how they coped with it. That's right.
So then they become physiologically dependent on that particular substance, right? And then we have this sort of addiction cycle. But it's not because of it. It's because they were trying. It was an undiagnosed ADHD. We know it's genetic, right? Are they addictive? I have to say, one of the hardest things I have my clients do, and I don't know about you, Nikki, but is to remember to take their medications.
Yes, yeah.
Trying to figure out a system to take their medications. And to me, that's sort of the anti-definition of addiction.
Yes, it's so true. It's so true.
They can't remember when to get their medications filled. They can't remember, just like you said about this one question with this young man who's taking the Metadate 50 and then as needed at, the 10 milligrams as needed. That as needed is rarely taken. And that is not what an addict does. An addict is thinking, okay, I took my medication. When can I take my next one? Or maybe I'll just take it along with this one. That is not happening with our clients. They can't remember to take their medication.
I also had a question from a client about just ideas on navigating the healthcare system, especially when you're first diagnosed. And what I thought was really interesting about this is he was talking about all the loopholes and the steps. And these details are so hard for somebody with ADHD to wrap their heads around. Any advice on how to get through that piece of it?
Yeah, I actually have a term for that. I call it the PMS, prescription medication syndrome.
Oh, so true.
People go, what? And I know, prescription medication syndrome. It is this nightmare of that. It seems to be very unconducive to the direct challenges that somebody is trying to treat with their ADHD. The fact that we need to be just, a few days ahead of getting our prescription refilled. And sometimes that entails calling our physician, calling the pharmacy. I think that for each person, there's 2 or 3 days in the month that they're off their medications because, again, this prescription medication syndrome, there's that lapse between, oh my gosh, that was my lapsed pill, and I need to get this refilled, right? So I'm trying to think how to say this, what the other challenges are. It's so difficult. I oftentimes wonder, what do people do that don't have a medical background? I myself was just trying to get some medications filled, and I was thinking, this is ridiculous, right? This is ridiculous. And it unfortunately is one of those things where, again, we have to sort of self-advocate for ourselves and recognize that we need to do that, and we need to ask questions. I am a big believer in, especially because getting the medications refilled seems to be one of the hardest problems, along with remembering to take it, is to set up different systems or structures for yourself to do that. Typically, I find that if they think they're going to remember to take it, which doesn't happen, but I find that associating it with something that you normally do every day is a good habit. I had one gal that said, and I hope this isn't too much information, but she said, yeah, what I do is I put it on a shelf right in front of where I sit on the toilet every morning, and then I see it and I know I'm going to take it, right? Another person,
that's right.
She goes,
that's like tiny habits
I'm like,
in a nutshell.
Right. I'm like,
there.
Whatever it takes. Other people tape it to the coffee maker because they know they're going to head there. Right. Set alarms for yourself so you remember to do it. The same is true for getting it refilled, is to set an alarm that goes on. And phones, it's one of the things I really like about the iPhone, is you can actually set alarm for yourself that goes off. And if one doesn't do it, set it on multiple times to make sure that you're getting your prescription filled. It's the hardest thing for them to do.
Well, and this particular person that asked this question was saying that he was in a different state doing something. I don't know if he was visiting family or something, and he couldn't get the medication from that state. I mean, it was just a big mess. And they took the little piece of paper right out of his hands and said, I'm sorry, but we got to take it.
Yeah. Crazy, right?
Gosh, it makes you feel terrible.
And then the other thing that is so, unfair. It makes me actually very angry when I hear that this happens to people, is that they'll oftentimes feel like they get sort of a suspicious look from their pharmacists.
Yes.
Right? Like or if you're an adult, why are you taking this? This is a medication for a child. And it is, if I could get a bunch of pharmacists, I'd love to do that. I mean, what a terrible thing, right? Here you are, you're trying to follow the rules. It's probably a new diagnosis for you. There's probably struggles along there anyway. You're just trying to get your silly medications filled. Nobody looks at you like that when you walk in with high blood pressure medication and, and maybe what you need to be doing is out jogging or something. But there is so much stigma about this, and it's so unnecessary that people have to go through that on top of, right, I would be like cheering, yay, you're here to get your prescription filled.
I was just going to say, the pharmacist should be congratulating you for even showing up.
Well, for showing up on the day you need it when you hadn't run out yet.
Well, and then they're living with that shame and guilt, and they don't need that. They've got other areas that they feel shame and guilt about. The last thing they need to worry about is the medication to help them. Right. Yeah. And how in the heck did shame and guilt get in this thing anyway? Right. This is. I know. Yeah. This is not this is a genetic disorder. It's no different. If who feels shame and guilt if for whatever reason in their family they have a cancer gene, right? We look at it, we go, let's take care of that. Let's make sure, let's, be proactive with it. And where people are cheered on for that. They're not looked at like there's some sort of, like something's wrong because they have this variation in their genetic code. So it's very, very frustrating. Well, and it's interesting because one of the first things I'll tell people, especially when I first start working with them, is, we do this educational piece, right? As coaches, we talk about ADHD and how it affects you. And one of the things I'll say is, this is not your fault. And I can't tell you, it gives me chills just to even say it. You just hear this pause, and sometimes there's tears, with that, because they realize, or they're coming to terms that this is not your fault.
This is not about motivation or interest or trying harder, or it's not about that. This is just a variation of the way that your brain works. There are medications that can make a difference. If you want, they're possible to try. They can help, but we need to be our own advocate. We need to find sources of information that feel right for us. And I say that because I think most people in their gut know if they're being led down sort of a path of misinformation. So talk with people who know, who can provide answers for you, and just know that that's part of this sort of, I don't want to say game that we're playing, but part of the diagnosis.
Well, I look at it as a puzzle, really. When you look at like ADHD care, management of ADHD, it's a puzzle, and medication is just one of those pieces.
So, yeah, and I think when it comes to, like you said, sort of the health organization, I mentioned, about the getting prescriptions filled. If you don't like the person prescribing for you, find somebody else. I know that's easy to say, but you do not need to be working with somebody who is not giving you the support that you need. So go find somebody else. Contact one of the resources, or we have a lot of international organizations that support people with ADHD that might be able to give you the referral to someone else. And I know there's a cost factor involved with this for a lot of people. I think it's worth the cost, if it's possible, to go through the process of getting the medication, the dosage, the timing, the type of medication that works for you down. And then a lot of times what I find after that is that their primary provider or their internist or their family practitioner or whatever is willing to maintain the prescription. They usually have a better relationship with them. But to get it down so that you know that it's working for you, don't be afraid to ask questions. If you ask the questions and somebody says you don't need to know that, turn around, pick up
and walk off.
Yeah, pick up Yelp. I don't know what you pick up. And you. I'm serious. I found some of my best doctors on Yelp. And go find somebody else or ask somebody else. Who do you see? Just because they have an MD or PhD or even a nurse practitioner doesn't mean they know ADHD.
I'm curious to know from you, or if you've heard about any new research or, anything coming up, new advances that our listeners might be curious about.
It's sort of this interesting thing. Most people, it seems like there's a sense that, this whole ADHD thing is new. If we spend time studying ADHD or being around ADHD, like you and I are, Nikki, right? We know that this is a behavior. This has been identified hundreds of years ago. We've seen it in the literature. Medications for ADHD actually came out around the 1950s. That's when the first stimulant methylphenidate came out, at the same time that Tylenol was. And if you kind of consider that, it's like, wow, okay, so we've been studying them for a long time. So whenever people are saying we don't know a lot what the long-term effects are of this, I'm like, goodness gracious, these have been out for 65 years and have been studied ad nauseam. I can't say that word. You know what I mean? Over and over
I'm
again.
I'm not even going to try.
Over and over again.
Ad nauseum.
Ad nauseum. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. Yeah, ad nauseum. To know whether or not it's safe or it's not safe. And even in that time, 65 years, and think about this, like the treatment of cancer, the treatment of depression and all that, in all those years, we really haven't found too many differences in our new medications that make a bigger difference than what we've already had. You had the methylphenidate that came out, the Ritalins, then you had the amphetamines, like Adderalls. Then what really started to change, then you had the formulation of them, how they were packaged is how I put it, how they were released in a person's body. They're pill form, liquid form, patch form, those things started to change. But again, the active ingredients have not changed that much. We've added some other medications like guanfacine that actually works similar to blood pressure medication that a lot of kids anyway who have sort of an anger, impulsivity, it's prescribed for them often, but not as a primary medication for ADHD, but secondary. We have a non-stimulant that is really just a remake of a antidepressant that was popular in the 1950s or so. And because I don't think the medications got smarter, but the people creating them got smarter, so they were able to clean it up. There's less side effects, but really it's not a new medication. But what they found when they were using this particular medication for persons with depression or anxiety, that some of their ADHD symptoms were also improved. And we know how commonly those three different conditions go together. Coming up, it seems sort of a little bit of the same thing, a little bit of tweaking of this, different changes in administration that we haven't had. Certainly Vyvanse sort of changed the scene. Again, the same active ingredient, that's an Adderall. It's just that it's released in our body differently. And so the benefit of that was a much longer acting medication. But again, it's the same thing, just sort of remade in a different format. So that's actually what the, again, no new specific active ingredients are being looked at. I can't find that. It would be exciting if it was. And it's also sort of the response I give to people when they say, the pharmacies, or not pharmacies, but the medication companies are making all this money. And I'm thinking, man, they would make a mint if they could just figure out another active ingredient that works as effectively as, more effectively than what we have out here. But,
oh my goodness. I was just going to reflect on that. I mean, when I'm at my very worst, when I'm like letting people down because I'm forgetting things and I'm just not delivering what I need to do, like the only thing that is front of mind when everything else should be front of mind is why haven't they solved this experience for me yet?
Exactly. Right. So, So unfortunately, nothing new looks like it's coming on the horizon with regards to a new active ingredient. For some reason, dopamine, the neurotransmitter and dopamine are just sort of like still quite a mystery to us. Part of it is that we minimize the effects that ADHD has on our lives. And a lot of people that would be prescribing ADHD medications are looking at other disorders, and there's much more information. And let's just face it, much more medications to treat those. So ADHD stops being a little bit, interesting because there's not a lot of differences in there. Having said that, we certainly know that the extended, the medications that have an extended release have really made a difference for folks. No longer do we have to sort of try and remember to take the medication. So that's been a huge change, a real positive change, even though it's the same active ingredients. But one of the most interesting things I was reading about is that they're trying to come up with a medication, or I don't know which companies they are, but there's some medications trying to be reformulated, but again, the same active ingredients, but you can take at night so that when you wake up in the morning, you actually have it's already started to work. So you're waking up with your you're already ramped up. So your brain is already a little bit turned on. I mean, right now a lot of people do that by, setting a couple different times on their alarm and taking their medication and then falling back to sleep.
Waking
and then,
back up, right.
Yeah. But that's it's kind of novel, I think. Wow, okay, taking it at night. That's a little different because most of these medications we need to take in the morning. And so that's new. But again, it's not a change in the active ingredient in it. By any means. It's just really still playing around with some of the stuff we already have.
Well, that is great information. I had no idea. Half of the stuff you've talked about, this has been so new for me. Medication is not something I focus on because I don't know a lot about it. So I appreciate you so much being here today and sharing this information with our listeners. I know we covered a lot, but I fear that there might still be more questions out there. Where can people find you and reach out to you if there are more questions?
Yeah, great. People can find me. They can go to my website at what?
I can be found.
I can be found. You can Google me, but you can go to my website, probably the most direct, coachingforadhd.com. If you want to email me, you can email me at support@coachingforadhd.com, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. So just remember Coaching for ADHD and you'll find me. Well,
and in our show notes, we will have your full bio and all of those other places too, Twitter, Facebook. I know you're on a lot of social media stuff too. So.
And I want to say, one of the things that I do teach in my training program, I have a coach training program now that is about medications, just so that we have the information. It's not about prescribing, it's not about diagnosing, but it's saying this is information that is going to be helpful for us to be able to help our clients, and it's really geared towards individuals just so that they understand how their medication works, because they are the ones that are at choice with this, and the information is not out there. And a lot of times when somebody tries to present this, they do it in a way that is so complicated that it doesn't make sense. So one of the things that I do is I do a class. It's like a 5-week class actually that really makes it make sense, still professional, but not in this crazy brain, brain words. They're words that make sense so that oh, this is what's happening in my brain. This is how the medications work. This is why that one does that. This is what's happening when the medication is wearing off in my system. all of those things. I help people understand so they can make a educated choice, what's right for them or right for a loved one.
Well, I think you're you're filling a need there, definitely, because the information is not out there, and that's fantastic.
This is wonderful information, Laurie. Thank you so much for taking the time. And we said this was going to be a legendary episode. I think it certainly is legendary in length for us. This was just a nonstop, awesome kind of roller coaster. I hope people get a lot out of it. But you're also our very first guest.
Yay!
Which is awesome. Yay.
I'm so excited.
Need a plaque.
I want a plaque. I want a little plaque.
You should have a plaque.
Yes. That's right.
This has been just terrific. So thank you so much for taking your time and joining us.
My pleasure. What a lot of fun for me, Pete and Nikki. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Well, this has been great. Thank you, everybody. Once again, Take Control ADHD, subscribe to the show. And, it really helps others find the show if you take your time, just a minute, head over to iTunes and leave us a kind 5-star review. That helps others who need help and support with their ADHD to find out all of these great resources like our conversation today with Laurie. So on behalf of Nikki Kinzer and the great Laurie Dupar, I am Pete Wright, and we will catch you next week on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.